Story 1, The Silent Shipwreck. I was alone out on the water that night, as usual, but something felt different about that evening. The wind was still, almost non-existent, and the sky was a deep shade of blue, yet there was an unsettling tension in the air that I couldn't quite explain. The sea was as smooth as glass, reflecting the fading light of the sun, and I had been fishing for hours with no luck. That wasn't usual. The ocean was usually generous to those who waited, but tonight it felt as if the water itself was hiding something. Something I wasn't meant to see. It was getting late, and I began considering packing it in. I decided to throw out one last line, cast one more net, but then I saw it, something off in the distance, barely visible on the horizon. A shape, a form. It looked like a ship, but there was something wrong with it. Too still, and it had no lights. It was too close to be natural, yet too far to be anything I recognized. I couldn't understand it. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to row closer. As I approached, the ship became clearer, but the more I saw, the more it unsettled me. The ship was old, impossibly old. The kind of ship you only see in history books or old photographs. The sails were tattered, the hull battered by what seemed like years of storms. But what truly made my stomach churn wasn't the ship itself. It was the silence. There was no creaking of wood, no rumble of an engine, not even the soft ripple of water as the ship drifted. Just stillness. I was nearly alongside it now, and I could see the deck. Dark. Empty. There wasn't a single soul in sight. I should have turned around, but instead, I kept going. That's when I saw it. The movement. A shadow. Standing still, but moving across the deck at an unnatural pace. It was tall, cloaked in black, its form hard to make out, but it was unmistakably there. No footsteps. No sound, just this shadow gliding, far too fast to be human. My heart began to race in my chest. I wanted to shout, to ask who it was, but I couldn't bring myself to make a sound. The figure didn't acknowledge me. It didn't even seem to notice me. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished. Just like that. I watched in stunned silence, but the figure, everything, was gone. I snapped back into action, fumbling for the engine. My hand shook as I tried to start it, but I managed to pull away. I didn't dare look back until I reached shore. When I did, the ship was gone, as if it had never been there in the first place. The water was as calm as it had been before. Not a trace of the ship remained. I don't know what happened that night, but I'll never forget it. Something was there with me, something I wasn't supposed to see. And I know, deep down, that ship still haunts those waters. I feel its pull every time I go back, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to shake that feeling. Story 2, The Echoes of the Past. It was one of those nights when the sea felt like it was alive, restless and unnerving. The kind of night where the waves crash just a little too forcefully, and the wind howls with a cold bite. I was on my usual route, fishing the same waters that I'd known for years. The boat rocked gently as I drifted, the faint sound of the engine humming underneath me. But there was something in the air that night, something heavier than usual. It had been hours with no catch, just the dark expanse of the ocean surrounding me. The kind of stillness that made you question if you were even real. That's when I saw it. Off in the distance, near the shore, a figure, a woman. I almost didn't believe it first, but as I steered closer, I could make out her silhouette standing alone on the rocks. She was dressed in old, tattered clothing, her hair flowing wildly in the wind, almost like she belonged to a time that wasn't now. I don't know why, but I felt a pull to her. as if something was drawing me in, something I couldn't resist. I slowly maneuvered the boat toward her, my engine cutting through the waves. When I was close enough to shout out to her, I noticed something strange. She wasn't moving, not even when the wind gusted fiercely, whipping her hair and clothes around. She just stood there, staring out at the sea. I called out to her, "Hey, are you all right?" My voice seemed to disappear in the wind, but she didn't flinch. There was something in her stillness that unsettled me. I pulled the boat closer, more cautious now. As I got near the rocks, I saw her face, pale and weathered. Her eyes, there was a sadness in them, but also an intense depth, as though she'd seen things that no one should ever have to. She finally turned her head toward me, and when she did, I felt a chill run through my entire body. "This place, it's never been the same since the fire," she whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear her over the crashing of the waves. I didn't understand. "What fire?" I asked, but before I could say anything else, she was gone, just vanished. One moment, she was there, standing on the rocks, and the next, nothing. I thought I was losing my mind. There were no waves, no signs of her moving. She had simply disappeared. I couldn't get back to shore fast enough. My heart pounded in my chest as I checked every inch of the boat, but there was no sign of the woman. I tried to shake it off, but the words she said kept echoing in my mind. Since the fire. I didn't know what fire she was talking about, but I couldn't let it go. The next day, I did what any sensible man would do. I researched it, and what I found shook me to the core. There had been a fire years ago, before I was even born. It had burned down the very dock I had been fishing from, and the woman, the one I saw, she was one of the victims of the blaze, a passenger on a boat that sank right there. There was no way she could have known about it, not unless I still go out on that water, but I never go near those rocks. Every time I pass by, I can't help but feel her watching me, and every time the wind blows in just the right way, I hear her whisper, "This place, it's never been the same since the fire." Story 3. The Silent Fisherman. It was just a regular morning, or at least that's what I thought. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light over the calm waters. The sea, as usual, was quiet, almost too quiet. It's hard to explain, but there's a feeling you get when the water's still, like it's waiting for something to happen. I've been out on the boat alone, tried to reel in a decent catch, but the ocean seemed to be keeping its secrets from me that day. I passed by the usual spots, the ones where I always catch something. But not today. There was nothing. No fish, no movement. Just silence, stretching for miles. My eyes kept scanning the horizon, hoping for something, anything, to break the monotony. That's when I saw him. A man, sitting on a small boat in the distance. I didn't recognize him, but there was something about the way he was sitting so perfectly still that made me uneasy. He wasn't fishing. He wasn't doing anything. Just sitting there motionless, staring out at the open sea. The kind of posture that felt too deliberate, too unnatural. The man was dressed in worn clothes, as if he'd been out on the water for far too long. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just the silence of the ocean pressing down on me. Either way, I steered my boat closer to his, moving cautiously. As I got nearer, I could see his face, sunken, pale, with a far-off look in his eyes, like he wasn't really there, like he was waiting for something or someone. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Not a flinch, not a movement. It was as though he couldn't hear me, or maybe he didn't want to. I pulled my boat closer, thinking I might be able to help. But when I reached out, ready to speak again, I froze. The man's boat was empty. There was no one there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Just a small, rickety boat drifting on its own. No sign of the fisherman who had been sitting in it just moments before. I looked around, scanning the water, but there was no sign of him. No splash, no movement in the water, nothing. I felt my heart racing as I grabbed the oars and started to row faster, my thoughts racing. I checked every inch of the boat, thinking maybe he'd slipped overboard somehow, but there was no sign of him. No splash, no evidence of anything happening, just the emptiness of the sea. I kept looking over my shoulder as I rowed back to shore, waiting for something to appear, for him to somehow reappear from the water, but he never did. When I got back to the dock, I immediately asked the other fishermen if they'd seen him, if they knew who he was. But no one had seen him. No one had heard of him. It's been years since that day, but every time I go out, I think about that boat, the empty boat that seemed to drift on its own, the fisherman who wasn't there. And no matter how many times I try to explain it, I still don't understand what I saw. But one thing for sure, there's something out there in the sea that I'm not meant to know. Story 4, The Deep Sea Whisper. It was supposed to be a simple night of fishing, just another routine trip out on the water. The kind of trip that had become second nature to me. I had my gear, my boat, and a calm sea under the night sky. I'd been out on the ocean countless times, so nothing ever seemed to faze me. But that night, something felt wrong. The water was unnervingly still. No ripples, no waves. It was like the ocean was holding its breath, waiting for something I couldn't understand. I dropped my line in, expecting the usual quiet hours of solitude. But then came the first sign that something wasn't right. I felt it, a whisper, faint at first, but distinct enough to make me pause. I froze. It was soft, almost like a breeze brushing past me, but there was no wind. The whisper came from beneath the boat. It was a voice, distant and muffled, like someone calling out from the deep, but not in words I could understand. Just a sound, a rhythm, a beckoning pull. I looked around, but there was no one else out on the water. The stars above were distant, too far away to bring any comfort. I leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the dark water below. The whispers grew louder, just on the edge of hearing, as if the ocean itself was trying to speak to me. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks. But the more I listened, the clearer the whispers became. They weren't just sounds. They were calling my name, softly at first, but with an urgency that grew stronger with each passing second. Come closer, the voice seemed to say, though it was more feeling than words. It was like the ocean wanted me to reach deeper, to fall into it, to listen more closely. I leaned over further, my heart pounding in my chest, when suddenly a sharp tug on my line. I jerked back in surprise, but I didn't feel the familiar way of a fish on the hook. Instead, there was resistance, something heavy, something that didn't belong. I pulled hard, but the line didn't budge. The whispers were now a constant murmur in the air, all around me. It felt like the sea itself was pulling at me, trying to draw me down. The tugging grew stronger, the forced jerk of my boat in every direction. I was losing control. The boat rocked violently as I tried to reel in whatever was caught, but it felt like something far more powerful than a fish was at the other end. The whispers turned to murmurs, then to shouts, louder and louder, until they became deafening. I could hear my own name now, echoing across the water like a warning, but there was nothing I could do. With one final, desperate pull, The line snapped. The boat lurched violently to one side, and I felt the weight of it pull me forward, into the cold, dark water. I stumbled back in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The whispers ceased. The ocean was still again. The boat settled, quiet and eerily calm. I spent the next few hours trying to recover my bearings. The whispers never returned, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. I could feel their presence, their weight on the water, like a memory etched into the depths, something ancient and unfathomable. When I returned to shore, I checked my line again, looking for any sign of what I had pulled up. Nothing. No fish, no debris, no trace of anything. Just a smooth, empty line. It's been months since that night, but I still hear the whispers when I close my eyes. And every time I return to sea, I can't help but wonder they're still out there, waiting, calling, reaching for something or someone.